A plane was falling. The captain was writing his goodbye. Passengers were screaming. Then a girl stood up and walked forward. The military jet scrambled. The pilots locked on. Then they saw what she was doing, and froze. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Tuesday, March 19, 2025. 6:47 a.m. Pacific Time. Los Angeles International Airport. The sky over LAX is painted in deep purple and burnt orange, the sun still climbing over the distant San Gabriel Mountains, throwing long shadows across the tarmac. Terminal 4 is waking up slowly, the way airports always do before the rest of the world remembers it exists. Coffee kiosks rattling their shutters open. Gate agents arriving with travel mugs and tired eyes. The overhead lights buzzing to full brightness, chasing away the last blue shadows of pre-dawn. Somewhere down the corridor, a janitor pushes a mop bucket that squeaks with every third wheel rotation, the sound echoing off the polished floor like a lonely metronome. Gate 47B. Transcontinental Flight 2983 to Washington, D.C. boarding begins at 6:52 a.m. The Boeing 777 sits at the gate like a sleeping giant, massive and patient, white fuselage gleaming under the terminal lights. 284 passengers are about to board her. Business travelers in rumpled suits, already checking emails on phones, already mentally halfway to wherever they're going. Families with sleepy children who lean against their parents' legs like small warm weights. College students with enormous backpacks and headphones around their necks. An elderly couple holding hands, moving slowly, in no particular hurry. Nobody pays much attention to the girl who boards with them. She is easy to miss. 5 feet 2 inches tall, maybe 110 pounds soaking wet. East Asian features, high cheekbones, dark intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that are slightly crooked on her nose. Her black hair is pulled back in a messy ponytail that suggests she did not look in a mirror this morning, or if she did not care what she saw. She is wearing an oversized MIT hoodie that hangs past her hands, ripped jeans with actual rips from wear rather than fashion, and worn Converse sneakers that have seen better years. She is carrying a battered laptop covered in aerospace engineering stickers, NASA, SpaceX, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and a backpack so stuffed with textbooks that the zipper strains at its limits, one sharp movement away from giving up entirely. She moves through the aircraft with the distracted air of someone whose mind is somewhere else entirely. She finds seat 8A without seeming to look for it, settles in, and immediately pulls a notebook from her backpack. The man in 8B, a heavy-set businessman in a blue tie, opens his mouth to say something friendly. She does not look up. Her pen is already moving across the page in rapid, precise strokes. He closes his mouth again. She mutters to herself in Mandarin while she writes. The equations filling her notebook are complex enough that the businessman, who has an MBA from Wharton and considers himself reasonably intelligent, cannot begin to guess what they mean. They look like something from a graduate-level course in physics or engineering. Maybe both. You are in seat 31E, near the back of the aircraft. You walked past her during boarding, and you noticed the notebook for just a moment. Smart kid, you thought. MIT student. Heading back after spring break, probably. Acing classes the rest of us couldn't even pronounce. Then you forgot about her completely, because you had your own concerns to occupy you, the presentation waiting in DC, the client who keeps changing the scope, the fact that you hate early morning flights, and the man in 31D is already snoring even though the plane hasn't pushed back yet. You had no idea who she was. You had no idea that her name is Dr. Mei Chun, though nobody calls her doctor because she is only 19 years old and barely looks it. You had no idea that she earned her PhD in aerospace engineering from MIT 3 weeks ago, becoming the youngest person in the program's history to successfully defend a doctoral dissertation. You had no idea that she started college at 14, that she has been described by her professors as a mind that appears once in a generation, that she has already been offered positions at Boeing, NASA, and the Air Force Research Laboratory and has not accepted any of them because she is 19 years old and has run out of school to attend and is not entirely sure what a person does after that. And you had absolutely no idea that in 17 minutes and 34 seconds, she is going to save your life. To understand what is about to happen, you need to understand where Mei Chun comes from. Not MIT. Not the labs and the late nights and the dissertation committee. Further back than that. Further back to a 12-year-old girl in Boston who got a phone call one evening and found out that the world she had known until that moment no longer existed. May was 12 years old when her parents died. Her father was a structural engineer. Her mother was a high school mathematics teacher. They were flying home from a conference in Beijing, aboard Air China Flight 583, a routine route they had taken several times before. The aircraft entered an uncontrolled dive at cruising altitude over the Yellow Sea. There were no survivors. The investigation that followed concluded that a malfunction in the fly-by-wire flight control computer had caused a cascade failure that locked the horizontal stabilizer in a nose-down position. The crew had been unable to recover. The aircraft had impacted the sea at high speed. May was staying with her grandmother in Cambridge when the call came. She remembers the exact moment, 7:14 p.m. on a Thursday in October. She was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. Her grandmother answered the phone and then sat down very slowly, the way old people do when something has taken the strength out of their legs. At her parents' funeral, standing between her grandmother and her aunt in the cold Boston rain, 12-year-old Mei Chun made a promise. She said it quietly, to herself, in Mandarin, so that only she could hear it. I am going to understand what happened. I am going to learn everything there is to know about aircraft. I am going to make sure this never happens again. She enrolled at MIT at age 14 on a full scholarship. She was the youngest student in the history of the aerospace engineering program. Her professors found her brilliant and a little frightening, the kind of student who would read the assigned textbook in the first week and then come to office hours with questions about journal papers that were not on the syllabus. She slept 6 hours a night and spent the other 18 studying, working in the lab, and filling notebooks with calculations. Her dissertation topic, chosen in her third year of graduate study, was titled, Autonomous Recovery Systems for Catastrophic Flight Control Failures Using Real-Time Computational Fluid Dynamics. In simpler terms, what happens when an aircraft's flight control computer fails completely, what backup options exist, and what would a person need to know and do in order to restore control manually. She chose to focus on the Boeing 777 family because it used a similar fly-by-wire architecture to the aircraft that had killed her parents. She studied the 777's flight control systems until she could draw them from memory. She memorized the location of every circuit board, every wiring harness, every backup system. She ran thousands of computer simulations of catastrophic failure scenarios. She designed, in theory, a procedure for manually overriding the flight control computer from inside the aircraft's electronics bay, located beneath the cockpit floor, in cases where the digital systems had failed completely. Her dissertation committee gave her the highest possible marks. Her external reviewer, a former chief engineer at Airbus, wrote in his report, "This dissertation represents a genuinely original contribution to aviation safety engineering." The manual override procedures described in Chapter 7 are particularly noteworthy. To my knowledge, no such documented procedure exists in current operational use. I would strongly recommend these procedures be reviewed by Boeing and incorporated into their safety documentation. Boeing received a copy of the review. They filed it. 3 weeks ago, May defended her dissertation. Perfect score. Standing ovation from the assembled faculty. Job offers from 3 of the most prestigious aerospace organizations in the world. She accepted none of them. She got on a plane to visit her grandmother in Boston, spent 2 weeks sitting in the kitchen where she had been sitting when the call came, and then got on another plane to Washington, D.C. for an aviation safety conference where she has been invited to present her research. She is in Seat 8A. She is doing calculus. She is 19 years old and she is not thinking about emergencies or flight control systems or her parents. She is thinking about whether the equations in front of her are correct, and whether she will be able to eat something before the conference begins, and whether she remembered to pack her anxiety medication. She did remember. She took it this morning. Good thing. Captain Thomas Wright has been flying for 32 years. He has 28,000 hours in his logbook. He is 58 years old, gray at the temples, with the calm unhurried manner of someone who has seen most things that can go wrong in a cockpit and dealt with all of them without losing his composure. He is thinking about retirement. 2 more years, and then he and his wife are buying a boat and sailing to the Caribbean, which is a plan he has had for the past decade and which he fully intends to execute this time. First Officer Jennifer Park is 36, with 7,200 hours and a reputation in the airline for being meticulous and precise. She is reviewing the arrival procedures for Reagan National Airport. She likes to be prepared. She likes to know exactly what is coming. Los Angeles departure, Transcon 2983, passing 12,000 for flight level 380, Wright says into his headset. Transcon 2983, Los Angeles departure, climb and maintain flight level 380, the controller responds. Routine. Utterly routine. Outside the cockpit windows, the California landscape falls away below them. The brown hills and the sprawl of the greater Los Angeles basin, the glittering thread of the freeway network, the distant blue of the Pacific to the west. It is a clear morning. Light winds. No turbulence. Perfect flying weather. Wright is a content man at 7:24 a.m. on March 19, 2025. He is 32 years into a career he loves, on a routine flight, on a beautiful morning, on one of the most reliable aircraft ever built. He has no reason to believe that anything unusual is about to happen. At 7:25 a.m., a warning light illuminates on the center console. Flight Control System caution. Park sees it first. Tom. I've got a flight control caution. Wright checks. What kind? Primary computer. Showing a software fault. Wright frowns. In 32 years, he has seen flight control cautions before. They are almost always minor. A sensor hiccup, a spurious fault, something that resets itself and never appears again. He follows the procedure. Switch to backup. Switching. Park's hands move with practiced efficiency. Then she stops. Tom. Backup computer is showing the same fault. It's cascading. That's not possible unless. The aircraft's nose pitches down. Hard. Violent. Sudden as a dropped stone. The yokes lurch forward as if grabbed by an invisible hand. Everything that was sitting on the center console slides toward the windscreen. The altimeter begins to unwind at a speed that makes no sense for a controlled descent. The horizontal stabilizer has locked. Full nose down. Both flight control computers compromised by the same cascading software fault, running the same corrupted code, unable to distinguish between a commanded input and the locked position of the control surface. The aircraft is no longer obeying its crew. It has stopped listening. Wright pulls back on his yoke with both hands. Nothing. No response. The aircraft continues its plunge as if he is not there. I've lost pitch control. Park is already deep in the emergency checklist, her voice flat and professional despite everything. Flight control emergency. Attempting manual override, negative. Computer override, negative. Tom, we've got nothing. Wright's mind does the arithmetic that pilots do automatically, the cold calculation of physics, altitude, 23,000 feet. Descent rate, 15,000 feet per minute. Time to impact with the Mojave Desert below them, 91 seconds. 91 seconds. He picks up the PA microphone and his voice, when he speaks, is steadier than he has any right to be. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a flight control emergency. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and brace for. He puts the microphone down. He cannot finish the sentence. Because there is no brace position that helps with what is coming. Seat 8A, in the cabin, the nose pitches down and the world goes sideways. Loose items fly. People scream. Oxygen masks drop from the overhead panels and hang swaying in the suddenly tilted air. The businessman in 8B, who was almost asleep, grabs his armrests with both hands and makes a sound that is not quite a word. A child somewhere behind the main cabin begins to wail, the high pure sound of a child's terror cutting through all the other noise. In seat 31E, you grip the armrest and close your eyes and think, with absolute clarity, that you are going to die. You are thinking about your family. You are thinking about things you should have said. You are thinking that you hate early morning flights. In seat 8A, Mei Chen's notebook flies from her hands. She grabs the armrest. She feels the dive angle, steep, maybe 30 degrees nose down, violent and uncontrolled in a way that no normal descent ever feels. Her engineering brain activates before her fear does, because this is how Mei Chen works. The analytical part of her mind is always faster than the emotional part, always arriving first at the scene of a problem and beginning to work before the rest of her has caught up. Uncontrolled dive. Nose down attitude, approximately 30 degrees. Rate of descent, she estimates from the angle and the feeling in her stomach, 15,000 feet per minute. Cause, flight control failure. Specifically, horizontal stabilizer locked nose down. This failure mode has a single likely cause given the suddenness and severity, a cascading software fault in the fly-by-wire system, both primary and backup computers compromised by the same corrupted code. She knows this failure mode. She has studied it for 5 years. She wrote her doctoral dissertation on it. She knows that the crew cannot recover through normal flight control inputs, because the computers controlling the control surfaces are not listening. She knows that there is only one way to restore control: bypass the digital flight control interface entirely, establish a direct analog connection to the backup servo actuators, and restore manual control authority. She knows exactly how this is done, because she designed the procedure herself. She knows where the relevant components are located, because she memorized the Boeing 777 flight control architecture so thoroughly that she can close her eyes and see every circuit board, every junction box, every wiring harness in 3 dimensions. The procedure is in Chapter 7 of her dissertation. The components are in the electronics bay beneath the cockpit floor. She checks her watch. Estimates. 90 seconds to impact. Maybe less. She unbuckles her seatbelt. She stands up. Walking forward in a diving aircraft is like climbing a steep hill that is also vibrating and making noises that no aircraft is supposed to make. The floor tilts away from her at an angle that wants to push her backward into the screaming passengers. She leans into it, holds the headrests as she moves, pulls herself forward seat by seat. The flight attendants have been thrown into emergency mode. Senior Flight Attendant David Chen, no relation, is 52 years old with 28 years of flying experience, and he is doing exactly what he has been trained to do, moving through the cabin, checking on passengers, keeping his voice calm. He sees the girl coming forward and his training kicks in instantly. You need to sit down. Emergency. I need to get to the cockpit, Mei says. She keeps moving. What? Ma'am. The flight control computer has failed and locked the horizontal stabilizer nose down, Mei says, loud enough to be heard over the general noise of fear around them. The only way to recover is a manual override from the electronics bay beneath the cockpit. I know how to perform the procedure. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on this exact failure mode. I need you to open the cockpit door right now or everyone on this aircraft will die in approximately 70 seconds. David stares at her. This small girl in the MIT hoodie, barely taller than the seat backs around them. Speaking with a precision and calm that is completely at odds with everything happening around them. You're a doctor. PhD, Aerospace Engineering, MIT. I graduated 3 weeks ago. My dissertation was specifically on manual override procedures for catastrophic fly-by-wire failures. The procedure I designed is the only thing that can save this aircraft. Now please open the door. David Chen has 28 years of aviation experience and a very well-developed sense for situations that are exactly what they appear to be. This appears to be a 19-year-old aerospace engineer with a very specific skill set arriving at the exact moment that skill set is needed. He reaches for the cockpit door. "Captain, I need you to trust me." The cockpit of a Boeing 777 in a catastrophic emergency is not a calm place. Wright and Park are both fighting the dead controls with the focused desperation of people who know exactly how much time they do not have. The altitude is unwinding through 20,000 feet. The ground is rising to meet them. The door opens. May steps in. "Who the?" Wright starts. "Captain, my name is Dr. May Chen. I'm an aerospace engineer from MIT. Your flight control computer has cascaded into a software fault that locked your horizontal stabilizer full nose down. Your backup systems cannot override it because they are running the same corrupted code. The only recovery option is a manual bypass from the electronics bay beneath this cockpit. I have the procedure in my head and I know where every component is located. I need you to let me do this." Wright turns to look at her. He takes in the oversized hoodie, the wire-rimmed glasses, the messy ponytail. He does the arithmetic again. They are at 19,000 feet. They have perhaps 65 seconds. "You're a child," he says. "I am a doctor of aerospace engineering and I have 63 seconds to save this aircraft. Do you want to argue about my age or do you want to live?" First Officer Park says, quietly, "Tom. We have nothing to lose. Let her try." Wright makes the decision that he will think about for the rest of his life, in the 2 seconds he has available to make it. He nods. "What do you need?" "A maintenance kit. Wire cutters, screwdriver, flashlight. And access to the electronics bay. Overhead compartment." Park is already reaching. She pulls the maintenance kit and hands it to May without ceremony. May is already pulling back the cockpit carpet, revealing the hatch in the floor. "When I tell you, I need you to cut power to the primary flight control computer. It's switch 47 on your electrical panel. Do you know it?" "Yes." "Do not cut it until I tell you. If you cut it before I complete the bypass, we lose everything. Wait for my signal." She looks at Wright. He nods. "Okay." May opens the hatch. Below is darkness and the smell of electronics and the cramped mechanical world of the aircraft's guts. She drops in. The electronics bay of a Boeing 777 is not designed for human occupation. It is a cramped space beneath the cockpit floor, roughly 8 feet long and 4 feet wide, packed floor to ceiling with circuit boards, wiring harnesses, avionics boxes, and equipment racks. The temperature is warm from the electronics. The aircraft is diving, which means the bay is tilted at 30 degrees, which means every surface that should be horizontal is not, and May has to brace herself against the equipment racks to keep from sliding backward toward the tail. She clicks on the flashlight. The beam sweeps across circuit boards and color-coded wiring. She is looking for 3 things: the primary flight control computer junction box, the backup servo actuator control lines, and the manual interface point that exists in the Boeing 777's architecture but is not, according to Boeing's own technical documentation, accessible or useful in practice. May knows it exists because she found it in the maintenance schematics. Boeing's engineers had installed it as a theoretical emergency interface during the aircraft's original design and then apparently decided it was so unlikely to ever be needed that they did not bother documenting the procedure for using it. May had noticed it, noted it, and built her entire manual override procedure around it. Just in case. Just in case. She finds the junction box first. Exactly where it should be. She finds the backup servo control lines, color-coded in yellow, running along the port side of the bay. She finds the manual interface point, a small panel that looks, to the untrained, like nothing in particular, just another equipment connection. Her hands are shaking. She notices this and catalogs it the way she catalogs everything. Her hands are shaking because she is terrified, which is a reasonable response to the current situation, and the shaking is a problem because she needs precision. She takes one breath and does what she has always done when her anxiety threatens to overwhelm her. She starts reciting her dissertation. Out loud. In Mandarin. Quietly, just above a whisper, the words of 5 years of work flowing through her like a river finding its channel. Manual override requires disconnecting primary computer at junction box 7, establishing direct connection to backup actuators via redundant servo lines, bypassing digital command interface, restoring analog control authority through direct mechanical linkage. Her hands stop shaking. Or rather, they shake less. Enough less. She opens the wire cutters. She cuts the first connection. Above her, the altitude is passing through 15,000 feet. The ground is 45 seconds away. She cuts the second connection. Reconnects the first in the new configuration. The procedure requires 8 cuts and 7 reconnections in a specific sequence, because sequence matters. Cut in the wrong order and you interrupt a signal that needs to remain intact until the last possible moment. May designed the sequence herself. She knows it the way she knows her own name. Third cut. Fourth. She is crying, she realizes. She didn't notice when that started. Tears running down her face and dripping onto the circuit boards below her while her hands keep moving because her hands know what they are doing even if the rest of her is terrified. She thinks of her parents. Her mother's laugh. Her father's hands, large and careful, the hands of an engineer, always precise. She thinks, I am doing this for you. I couldn't save you, but I can save these people, and that is the same thing. That has to be the same thing. Fifth cut. Sixth. Seventh. One more. Final connection establishes direct servo authority, bypasses digital interface, restores analog control. She makes the 8th cut. Completes the 7th reconnection. The final connection point, the manual interface, is ready. She takes a breath. This is the moment. Either the bypass works and control is restored, or it doesn't and nothing she has done matters. She connects the manual interface. Captain. Her voice, crammed into that small space, sounds too loud and too high. Cut power to the primary computer. Switch 47. Now. Above her, right's hand finds the switch. Switch 47. The primary flight control computer goes dark. For 3 seconds, nothing happens. The aircraft is still diving. The Mojave Desert is 8,000 feet below and rushing upward at a speed that should not leave enough time for anything. Then the yoke moves. Just a fraction. Just a small, barely perceptible twitch, like a sleeping giant rolling over. But it moves. And Wright's hands are already on it, waiting, and he pulls back with everything he has. The yoke responds. Slowly. With a heaviness that suggests manual control rather than computer-assisted input, the resistance of cables and hydraulics rather than the smooth response of fly-by-wire. But it responds. The nose begins to rise. I have control. Wright's voice fills the cockpit. I have control. The descent rate begins to decrease. 15,000 feet per minute becomes 12,000 becomes 9,000. The altimeter, which had been unwinding like a broken clock, slows. The horizon, which had tilted catastrophically nose down, begins to come back. 5,000 feet per minute. 3,000. 1,000. The aircraft levels at 5,000 feet above the desert floor. In the cabin, the screaming stops. Or changes, becomes something different, becomes the sound of people realizing they are not dead, that the ground rushing up toward them has stopped rushing, that they are level and alive and somehow, impossibly, still in the sky. In seat 31E, you open your eyes. You are alive. You do not understand how. The aircraft is flying normally. The nose is level. The desert below is far enough away to be survivable. You are shaking so hard that your teeth are chattering, but you are alive, and for a long moment that is the only thing in the world that matters. Viper 1. At Edwards Air Force Base, approximately 90 seconds earlier, two F-22 Raptors lifted from the runway on military emergency orders. NORAD had flagged Transcontinental 2983 for rapid altitude loss consistent with either a catastrophic mechanical failure or a hijacking event. The standard protocol in either case is scramble and intercept. Major Tyler Morrison, call sign Viper, 11 years in fighters, 2,400 flight hours, 2 combat deployments, went supersonic 60 seconds after wheels up. Captain Lisa Hayes, call sign Reaper, tucked in on his wing. Viper established visual contact with the 777 at 19,000 feet and watched it diving. 30 degrees nose down. 15,000 feet per minute. An aircraft that should not be doing what it was doing. NORAD, Viper 1 has visual on target. Boeing 777 in steep dive. Confirmed uncontrolled descent. Rate of descent consistent with catastrophic flight control failure. Viper 1, attempt radio contact. Transcon 2983, this is U.S. Air Force Raptor 1, military emergency frequency. Respond immediately. A voice came back, steady, professional, the voice of a man with 32 years in the left seat, Raptor 1, Transcon 2983. We have catastrophic flight control failure. Not a hijacking. Repeat, not a hijacking. Mechanical emergency. Complete loss of pitch control. We have a passenger attempting manual override. Viper processed this. Say again. Passenger attempting manual override. Affirmative. Aerospace engineer. She's in the electronics bay. Viper switched to the encrypted military frequency. NORAD, Viper 1. Situation is unusual. They are claiming a passenger is performing manual flight control override from inside the aircraft. Request guidance. Viper 1, manual override from that location is not possible according to Boeing technical documentation. Verify your sensor data. Viper checked his displays. His F-22 carries sensors that can see things the naked eye cannot, infrared signatures, electronic emissions, details that most pilots never have reason to think about. He looked at the Boeing 777 and at the readings coming back from its electronics bay. NORAD, I am showing thermal signatures from the E/E bay consistent with active work being performed. Electronic emissions consistent with system reconfiguration. Someone aboard that aircraft is definitely doing something to the flight controls. Viper 1, standard protocol requires. NORAD. Viper said it quietly. I'm requesting permission to observe before taking action. My read of this situation is that it is not hostile. I recommend monitoring. There was a pause. Command thinking. Command calculating. Then, permission granted. Maintain visual. Report any change. Viper watched. He watched the aircraft dive. He watched the thermal signatures in the electronics bay spike and shift, patterns that made no sense according to any technical documentation he had ever read, patterns that suggested someone was doing something that the book said could not be done. He watched the altimeter on the 777's transponder unwind through 8,000 feet, then 7, then. The dive stopped. NORAD. Viper 1. Morrison's voice was flat with professional composure. The 777 has recovered. Level at 5,000 feet. Manual control restored. I am showing normal flight parameters. Viper 1, how is that possible? Viper pulled alongside the 777 and looked through the cockpit windows. He could see right at the yoke. He could see Park at her station. And on the cockpit floor, lying there, clearly exhausted, clearly a young woman, wearing, of all things, a hoodie with MIT written on it, he could see a girl. NORAD, he said. I have visual on the cockpit. Crew appears stable. I also have visual on what appears to be a teenage girl on the cockpit floor. She appears to be the individual who performed the override. She is wearing an MIT hoodie and she looks like she should be worried about midterms. He paused. Confirming, a college student just saved a Boeing 777. There was a long silence on the military frequency. Then, Viper 1, maintain escort. Elevating to Pentagon immediately. Viper switched to the civilian frequency. Transcon 2983, this is Raptor 1. That was the most remarkable piece of airmanship I have witnessed in 11 years of flying. Who is the girl in the hoodie? Captain Wright's voice came back, and there was something in it that had not been there before, something that sounded like wonder. Raptor 1. Her name is Dr. Mei Chen. She is 19 years old. And she just did something I was told was impossible. Emerging. Mei climbs out of the electronics bay. Her hands are bleeding where she cut them on sharp metal edges. Her MIT hoodie is soaked through with sweat. There is grease on her face and tears drying on her cheeks, and she is shaking in a way that she cannot control, a full-body tremor that comes from the place where terror and relief and exhaustion all meet. She collapses onto the cockpit floor. Wright unbuckles his seatbelt. He kneels next to her. He is 58 years old with 28,000 hours and 32 years of experience, and he has never felt what he feels in this moment. He puts his hand on her shoulder. You did it. You saved us. His voice is rough. Who are you? What did you just do? Mei looks up at him. Her glasses are crooked. There is a smear of grease across her cheek. She is, in this moment, the most extraordinary person he has ever met. My name is Dr. Mei Chen, she says. Her voice is steadier than it has any right to be. I'm an aerospace engineer. My parents died in a flight control failure when I was 12 years old. I've been studying this failure mode ever since then. I've spent 5 years building computer models and designing the procedure I just used. I've never done it on an actual aircraft before. Only in simulations. Wright stares at her. You designed that procedure? Yes. And you'd never used it in real life? No. But it worked. Yes. He doesn't say anything for a moment. He is a man who has been in the air for 32 years, and he is trying to find words for something that does not fit neatly into the vocabulary of 32 years of aviation experience. Thank you, he says finally. It is not enough. He knows it is not enough. But it is what he has. Park hands Mei an oxygen mask. Breathe. You're okay. Breathe. Mei puts the mask on her face and closes her eyes and breathes. In the cabin behind them, 284 people are doing the same thing, not quite understanding what has happened, only knowing that the ground that was coming up to meet them has gone away, that the aircraft is level, that they are inexplicably, impossibly, still alive. Wright cannot make it to DC. The aircraft has manual controls only, workable, but limited, nothing like the smooth authority of a fully functional 777. NORAD has already cleared them for an emergency landing at Edwards Air Force Base, the vast Air Force installation in the Mojave Desert, 40 miles northeast of Los Angeles. A runway long enough for anything ever built. The two F-22s escort them in, flying formation on either wing, close enough that Wright can see Viper's helmet in the cockpit of the Raptor. It feels, he will say later, like an honor guard. Like something from a movie, except that it is real and he is the one flying the aircraft and the girl who saved it is sitting on the floor behind him wearing an MIT hoodie. He makes the landing manually. No autopilot. No auto brakes. Just his hands on the yoke and his feet on the rudder pedals, and 32 years of experience translating into the smoothest manual landing he has ever made. The 777 rolls to a stop on Edwards's enormous runway. The brakes catch. The engines spool down. In the cabin, there is a sound that is not quite silence and not quite applause. It is the sound of 284 people breathing. Fire trucks arrive. Paramedics. Air Force security personnel. Within 45 minutes, the first FAA investigators appear. Within 90 minutes, there are Boeing engineers. Within 2 hours, the Pentagon has sent observers. May is taken to the base hospital. She is treated for cuts on both hands, exhaustion, and a severe anxiety episode that has been building since she dropped into the electronics bay and which she has been holding back through sheer force of concentration. She is given stitches in 3 places. She is given medication. She falls asleep for 4 hours in a hospital bed, and when she wakes up, the world has changed. The debrief. The classified briefing room at Edwards Air Force Base is full of people who have spent their careers being certain about things. The FAA investigators are certain about procedures. The Boeing engineers are certain about what their aircraft can and cannot do. The Pentagon observer is certain about almost everything. Major Morrison is certain that what he witnessed this morning does not match any category in his operational experience. And then Machen walks in, wearing a clean borrowed Air Force sweatshirt because her MIT hoodie is in an evidence bag, and everyone in the room looks at her, and several of them visibly recalibrate their certainty. The Boeing chief engineer speaks first. He is 61, silver-haired, with 40 years in aviation. He looks at May like a man looking at a puzzle whose solution he cannot quite accept. Dr. Chen. Can you walk us through exactly what you did in the electronics bay? I bypassed the digital flight control interface, May says. Her voice is calm. She is back in the mode she knows, explaining her work. The primary and backup computers had both cascaded into a corrupted state due to a software fault. They were locked in a command state that held the horizontal stabilizer full nose down. The standard override procedures failed because both systems were running identical corrupted code. The only way to restore control was to physically disconnect the computers from the control surfaces and establish a direct analog connection. Through the manual interface point, the engineer says. Yes. Dr. Chen. That interface point is not documented in any of our operational procedures. It's a legacy system from the original design. We have no procedure for using it because it was never intended to be used. I know, May says. I found it in the maintenance schematics during my doctoral research. I recognized it as a viable emergency override point and I built my manual override procedure around it. The procedure is in Chapter 7 of my dissertation. I can provide a copy. You designed a manual override procedure for our flight control system. I designed a procedure for saving lives when your flight control system fails. Today it did. Today I used it. It worked. There is a silence in the room. The kind of silence that happens when people are reorganizing their understanding of something. The Pentagon observer leans forward. He has been quiet until now, watching. Dr. Chen. How long have you had this procedure? I began developing it in my 3rd year at MIT. I refined it over the following 2 years. I finalized it and included it in my dissertation approximately 8 months ago. And you have never shared this procedure with Boeing or any aviation regulatory body? I shared my dissertation with my committee and with the external reviewers, including a former Airbus chief engineer who specifically recommended that Boeing review the manual override procedures in Chapter 7. She pauses. I understand Boeing received a copy of his review. Another silence. The Boeing engineer shifts in his chair. The FAA investigator speaks for the first time. Dr. Chen. Walk me through the moments between recognizing the failure and arriving at the cockpit. What was your decision-making process? I recognized the failure mode from the dive angle and the sudden onset. I estimated the time to ground impact. I calculated that the only recovery option available was the manual override procedure. I assessed that the time window was sufficient to attempt it if I moved immediately. I moved immediately. Just like that. I've run this scenario in my head thousands of times. In computer simulations, in theoretical exercises, in my own thinking about what I would do if I were ever on an aircraft experiencing this failure. Today was the first time it wasn't theoretical. Captain Wright speaks for the first time since the debrief began. He has been sitting at the end of the table, watching May, and his face has the expression of a man who is still processing something that does not fit into any of his previous categories. I told her she was a child, he says. When she came into the cockpit. I told her she was a child. You were right, May says. I am 19. And I almost didn't let you in. But you did, she says. That's what matters. Major Morrison is interviewed separately. He sits in the same chair, in the same room, and he answers every question the same way he does everything, precisely, professionally, and honestly. Describe what you observed from your aircraft, the FAA investigator says. I observed a Boeing 777 in an uncontrolled dive at approximately 30 degrees nose-down attitude and 15,000 feet per minute descent rate. I observed thermal signatures from the electronics bay consistent with active work being performed inside the bay. I observed electronic emissions from the bay consistent with system reconfiguration. I observed the aircraft recover from a dive that all of my training and experience told me should not be recoverable, using control inputs that our technical database says do not exist on that airframe. He pauses. Then I looked through the cockpit window and saw a 19-year-old girl lying on the floor. What was your assessment of the situation in real time? In real time, I was trying to determine whether I was watching the most sophisticated hijacking in aviation history or the most extraordinary piece of emergency engineering I have ever witnessed. The sensor data was consistent with hostile action, someone actively modifying flight control systems mid-flight. But the context was wrong. The crew was talking to me. They were calm. They were explaining what was happening. And something about it told me to wait. Why did you request permission to observe rather than immediately following standard intercept protocol? Morrison is quiet for a moment. 11 years in fighters, and he has always been the kind of pilot who trusts his instruments and trusts his training. Today, he trusted something else. Because what my instruments were showing me and what my gut was telling me pointed in the same direction, and it wasn't hostile. The thermal signatures in the E/E bay looked like someone working, not someone attacking. Someone desperate and precise. That's not how sabotage looks. That's how engineering looks. He pauses again. I've been in situations where I had to decide quickly and I've been wrong. Today I think I was right. I'm glad I waited. And if you had been ordered to engage? I would have followed orders, he says. But I would have asked for verification first. And I would have argued for more time. He looks at the investigator. She was saving 284 people. If I had engaged when the initial protocol suggested I should, would have killed 284 people. Including the person saving them. I don't know how to reconcile that except to say, I'm glad I waited. I'm glad NORAD gave me the latitude to wait. And I'm going to be thinking about that decision for the rest of my career. In the aftermath, investigators talk to passengers. They are looking for facts, for a timeline, for any detail that might help them understand what happened. What they get, along with the facts, is something less expected. You are interviewed in a small room at Edwards. You are still shaking slightly. You have called your family. You have said things that needed to be said. What do you remember about the passenger in seat 8A, the investigator asks. Almost nothing, you say. I walked past her during boarding. She was doing calculus. I thought she was a college student going back to school. That's all I thought. And then the emergency happened and I was certain I was going to die. And then somehow I wasn't. And they told us what she did and I. You stop. You look for the right words. She walked forward, you say. While everyone else was screaming and holding on. She stood up and walked forward. I didn't see it happen. But when they told me, I thought, of course. Of course the person who saved us was the quiet kid with the notebook who everybody ignored. Of course it was her. In a different room, Sarah Williams, seat 12C, tells her version. She was traveling with her 6-year-old son, who fell asleep against her arm during boarding and woke up to the emergency and gripped her with both small hands and said "Mommy, mommy, mommy" in a voice she will hear in her sleep for months. I saw her stand up, Sarah says. During the dive. This small girl in a huge hoodie, just standing up and walking forward while everything was chaos. I thought she was in shock. I thought she didn't understand what was happening. And then the plane leveled out and they told us what she'd done, and I just... She stops. She wipes her eyes. She's 19, Sarah says. She's barely older than a teenager. My son is 6. She saved him. She saved everyone on that plane. And she didn't know any of us. She just stood up and did it because she could, because she knew how, and that's, I don't have a word for what that is. I don't know how you thank someone for that. I don't think there's a way. Within 6 hours, the story has gone everywhere. Aviation journalists, national news networks, international outlets, the kind of story that crosses the barrier between niche interest and universal attention because it contains everything a story needs: crisis, courage, an impossible save, and at the center of it, a figure that nobody expected, a 19-year-old girl in an MIT hoodie who did something that the people who built the aircraft said could not be done. Her photograph, the one taken by an Air Force photographer during the debrief, may sitting across from a table full of engineers and officials and senior pilots, small in the borrowed Air Force sweatshirt, looking utterly calm, goes everywhere. The contrast does the work that words sometimes cannot. Everyone else in the room looks like what they are, professionals and officials and authority figures. May looks like a college student who wandered in by mistake. She did not wander in by mistake. MIT releases a statement. Her dissertation committee releases a statement. The Air Force Research Laboratory, which had offered her a job she had not yet accepted, releases a statement that sounds like a company trying very hard to let the world know it was paying attention all along. Boeing does not release a statement for 4 days. When they do, it is careful and measured and acknowledges, in language that has clearly been reviewed by lawyers, that the manual override procedure Dr. Chen used represents an innovative approach to emergency flight control recovery, and that Boeing is reviewing the procedures described in Dr. Chen's doctoral dissertation. Viper Morrison's encrypted transmission, NORAD, Viper 1. You seeing this? Leaks within a week. The 6 words become the headline. The Pentagon creates a classified file. Aviation safety bodies in 3 countries open reviews. And Mei Chen, who has been doing calculus in her notebook since she was old enough to hold a pencil, gives one interview. 1. And then she stops taking interview requests, because she has something more important to do. 1 week later. Boeing headquarters, Seattle. The kind of meeting that has a view and good coffee and the weight of a very large institution trying to negotiate with a person who has suddenly become significantly more important than the institution expected. The CEO is 63, trim, with the polished manner of a man who has spent his career in rooms like this one. He has a job offer prepared. He explains it: Chief Engineer, Flight Control Safety Systems. The youngest chief engineer in Boeing's history. Leading a team whose work is built directly on May's research. Full resources. Full access. The kind of position that people spend careers working toward. May listens. She is wearing a new MIT hoodie. Someone bought her one to replace the one in the evidence bag, and she looks the same as she did before all of this, small, precise, her glasses slightly crooked on her nose. You want to hire me to fix systems that killed my parents, she says. The CEO pauses. We want to hire you to prevent those systems from killing anyone else's parents. May is quiet for a long time. She thinks about a kitchen in Cambridge and the phone ringing and her grandmother sitting down slowly. She thinks about a funeral in the rain and a promise made quietly in Mandarin where only she could hear it. She thinks about the electronics bay of a Boeing 777 and her hands shaking and equations flowing through her like a river and 284 people alive because the river found its channel. "I'll take the job," she says. "One condition." "Name it." "I want full access to the Air China Flight 583 investigation files. Everything. I want to know exactly what happened. And I want to make sure it can never happen again." The CEO looks at her for a moment. "Done," he says. They shake hands. Mei Chen, 19 years old, becomes the youngest chief engineer in Boeing's history. The paperwork is processed. The security clearances are requested. The team is assembled. She goes home to Cambridge first. She sits in her grandmother's kitchen. She tells her grandmother what she has been doing, what happened, what she is going to do next. Her grandmother listens, holding both of May's hands across the kitchen table. "Your parents would be proud," her grandmother says, in Mandarin. "I know," May says. She means it. 2 weeks after the emergency, Major Morrison drives to Cambridge. He is in civilian clothes, jeans, a jacket, looking like anyone else on the street, and he knocks on the door of the MIT Aerospace Engineering Department office and asks if Dr. Chen is available. She is. She comes to the lobby and sees him and recognizes him from his photograph in the news coverage. She extends her hand. He shakes it. "I wanted to meet you in person," he says. "You're the F-22 pilot," she says. "The one who didn't shoot us down." "That's me." He smiles slightly. "I wanted to say, what you did was extraordinary. I've been flying for 11 years. I've seen a lot. I've never seen anything like what I saw on my sensors that morning. I just did what my research told me would work," May says. "Your research saved 284 lives. That's not just anything." He reaches into his jacket pocket. He takes out an F-22 squadron patch, the Raptors of the 95th Fighter Squadron, Edwards AFB. "My squadron gives these to people who've earned our respect. You earned it. You made 2 fighter pilots freeze in awe at 30,000 feet. That's worth remembering." May takes the patch. She looks at it for a moment. The Raptor on the patch, angular and precise, built for exactly this kind of sky. "Thank you," she says. "But I want you to know something. I didn't do it for recognition. I didn't do it to prove anything about what a 19-year-old girl can do, or about aerospace engineering, or about my dissertation." She looks at him directly. "I did it because my parents died in a flight control failure and I couldn't save them. But I could save those people. That's it. That's all it was." Morrison nods. He is a man who understands, from 11 years of flying, that the truest motivations are usually the simplest ones. Fear of failure. Love of the people counting on you. The specific and irreversible weight of a promise made to someone who is no longer there to hear you keep it. "I know," he says. "I know that's what it was." He pauses. "For what it's worth, I think they would be proud of you." Mei Chen, 19 years old, child prodigy, Ph.D., youngest chief engineer in Boeing history, the girl in the MIT hoodie who stood up in a falling aircraft and walked toward the front. Mei Chen blinks, once, behind her wire-rimmed glasses. "I think so too," she says. 6 months later. Boeing Flight Test Center, Seattle. A hangar large enough to swallow the imagination, and in it, a Boeing 777, full size, gleaming under the hangar lights. On the nose of the aircraft, in small letters below the Boeing logo, the call sign Phoenix. Mei Chen stands in front of it. She is wearing Boeing's version of her uniform, practical clothes, an ID badge, a headset around her neck. She still looks young. She always will. But she stands differently than she did 6 months ago in Seat 8A, she stands like someone who knows where they are, and why, and what they are here to do. Behind her, her team assembles. 12 engineers, all of them older than her, most of them significantly older. They came for the project. They stayed for her, for the precision and the focus and the particular quality of attention she brings to every problem, as if every problem matters because every problem does, because somewhere behind every failure mode and every safety procedure is a person on an aircraft, and that person deserves to come home. Her team has spent 6 months doing what May spent 5 years designing, taking the manual override procedures from Chapter 7 of her doctoral dissertation and turning them into operational reality. Every Boeing 777 in service will have the procedure. Documented. Trained. Ready. The electronics bay access hatch will have a laminated card attached to it with the steps in sequence, translated into 8 languages. Flight crews will train on it in simulators. Every 6 months, refresher training. Because of what May designed. Because of what she did. Because a 12-year-old girl made a promise at her parents' funeral and kept it for 7 years and then stood up in a falling aircraft and walked toward the front when everyone else was holding on. She walks to the nose of the 777. She places her palm flat against the fuselage, the way you might place your hand against the shoulder of someone you love. "Mom," she says, quietly, in Mandarin. "Dad." She is quiet for a moment. The hangar hums around her. Somewhere outside, an aircraft is landing, the scream of its engines coming down to the low rumble of deceleration, the sound of something enormous and improbable being made safe. "I couldn't save you," she says. "I've made peace with that, mostly. I was 12. I didn't know what I know now. Nobody did." She pauses. "But I saved 284 people using knowledge I built trying to understand why you died. Your deaths taught me something. That teaching saved lives. I think you'd be okay with that. I think you'd think that was enough." She takes her hand from the fuselage. She turns to her team. "Okay," she says, and her voice is crisp and warm and completely certain. "Let's get to work. We have safety systems to improve and I want the first simulator training module ready for pilot review by the end of the month. Let's go." Her team moves. They are good at their jobs. They are going to be better, because of her. Outside, another aircraft is landing. Then another. Then another. The sky over Seattle is full of them, crossing and descending, enormous metal things lifted by physics and held by systems and brought safely home by people who know what they are doing and by the accumulated knowledge of everyone who ever studied a failure and asked, what could we have done differently? What can we do better? How do we make sure this never happens again? Dr. Mei Chen, 19 years old, Chief Engineer of Flight Control Safety at Boeing, youngest in the company's history, the girl in the MIT hoodie, she answers that question every day. She has been answering it since she was 12 years old. She will keep answering it for as long as there are aircraft in the sky and people who need to come home. She rises from the ashes. She makes sure the ashes mean something. Phoenix.